What did you think then? What was your instant impression, both of you? What did you think about Lady Diana then?
Well, I remember thinking what a very jolly and amusing and attractive 16-year-old she was. And, I mean, great fun, and bouncy and full of life and everything. And I don't know what you thought of me.
Pretty amazing.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Well, it
Put your own interpretation.
obviously means two very happy people.
Yes.
Once
As you
again,
can see.
congratulations.
Well, from us, congratulations.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much. Very kind.
I remember the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer very well because I was at Buckingham Palace. I was responsible for the top table, which was the bride's table, the bride and groom, and of course the Queen and Prince Philip, and the bridesmaids. So I was waiting for the bride to come back. She'd appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. And then, at the end of a very long red carpeted corridor, I noticed this ball of white racing towards me, and I realized it was Princess Diana. She'd rolled her train up into a ball, tucked it under her arm. She had her slippers in one hand, and she was racing down this corridor, lined with windows, and the diamonds of the Spencer family tiara were glinting in the sunshine, and she was racing towards me. Just me and her in one corridor. She was like a galleon in full sail. What a picture of hope and happiness and love. She had it all. And that day, I waited the wedding breakfast in the ball supper room, served the Queen and the bride refused everything. She didn't eat a morsel. And she said to me later, I couldn't eat a thing, Paul. My stomach was in knots. I was just totally wound up by the day, by the excitement, by the spectacle. She says, but you know, the most wonderful thing was walking down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral with my father. She says, but did you ever look at the footage of that? I said, I've seen it many times. She says, next time you look at it, watch me. She says, can't you see me looking from side to side? Can you see me doing that? Do you know what I'm doing? I'm looking for her. I'm looking for Camilla. And she was there. She was even at my wedding. So this spectre of Camilla was always there in the princess's life.
I think the breaking point was probably in about 87, when Charles went up to Scotland for practically the whole summer and Diana stayed down here. And I think that she just, they just realised that they were completely unsuited. And she was, Charles was very, very miserable because he knew that as a future monarch, he really couldn't muck up on his marriage. And the thought of what he had done deeply depressed him. So he wasn't a lot of fun to be around. And Diana was thinking, I've got to get out of this, but she hadn't really thought it through. So if there was ever a moment, I think it was about, in the autumn of 87, and that's when the press realised that things were really bad. There was a lot of signs beforehand, but that was when it started to actually come out in the press.
Prince Charles wasn't always kind to the princess. In fact, sometimes he was quite cruel. I remember one occasion she came downstairs wearing a beautiful black and white Catherine Walker gown. And she said, Charles, I've had it made specially. Do you like it? You look like you belong to the mafia, he said, which cut her down to her knees. And then on one occasion she came down in a tartan dress and said, do you like this one? Well, you look like a British Caledonian stewardess. It was always undermining, just before an engagement began, so that she would lose her confidence. So it was mental cruelty in a way. I never saw any physical violence. I saw tables being upset. I saw crockery being thrown across the room, but I never saw any physical violence.
If he loses his temper, he's then incredibly sorry. and full of apologies. So he's basically a very kind and thoughtful and very sensitive person, but because of who he is and the life that he's led, he is used to getting his own way, and he's used to getting his own way quickly. And he just didn't understand somebody like Diana. She was much too young for him. He was a young person himself, and she was even younger. I think when you live in the royal family, you're not exposed to the real world, so you grow up much slower, and sometimes you think that they have the most childlike sense of humour, and they laugh about very childlike things, but they do because they haven't been out there like all of us. So Charles has been very protected.
Everyone knows the couple as Charles and Di, in that order. She is the mega media star with a sense of fun, a lover of the good times, but who doesn't hide the occasional impatience or boredom. But the Charles and Di phenomenon depends on him. He holds it together, and does so because he knows it helps the public idea of the Prince of Wales, and therefore the monarchy, whenever he comes to the throne. These days, his nervous mannerisms are increasing. He tires more quickly as the hard schedule continues relentlessly. The sense of duty exacts its own price. Charles at 40, and I imagine at 50 and 60, seems prepared to pay that price.
Well, I used to say that Diana was a high school dropout and Charles was a university lecturer. I mean, Diana, they were so different, and obviously that can work very well, but she was very, very young, and she'd had no experience of life. And although she'd lived on the Sandringham estate and knew the royal family, she didn't really know the royal family. And unless she didn't really know what it would be like to be married into them, although her father, Lord Spencer, had been an equerry to King George VI and was an equerry to the Queen, and he knew how the royal court worked, but Diana didn't. I think she thought it was all going to be sort of wonderful. So she'd been disappointed from the very beginning. And she had this vision of Charles, which wasn't really him at all. I mean, and then she started to find Charles very dull. And he found her stupid. I mean, she had a very quick wit, but she wasn't well read. She wasn't really educated, and Charles was highly educated. And all his friends were much, much older. So he started to dump his friends. And Diana's friends were all much, much younger. And so they started to lead separate lives very, very early on. And then Diana had children very, very quickly. I mean, William was born in 82, and she'd only got married in 81. And she had a very difficult pregnancy with William. So she was getting used to being royal. She was pregnant. The marriage wasn't quite what she imagined it, but she thought it would all be all right. So she was living on a dream, really.
In the early days, Diana's light was small, but he began to shine brighter and brighter and brighter. And it was a sort of a Star is Born situation. Prince Charles would say to her, "While I married you, I made you a princess. You weren't born royal. I'm the royal." So it would peeve him when on royal visits people would be shouting on one side of the street, "We want Diana, we want Diana." And I think in some interviews he actually did say, "I wish I could split my wife in half to do both sides of the street, because they don't actually want me." This is a man who's been born to be king. This is a man who has been treated from the very beginning as a god. Suddenly being eclipsed by this woman, he wasn't very happy.
Well, Charles was so used to having all the attention on him, which it had been since he was born. He didn't like the idea that they walked down the street, say when they were doing a royal engagement, and the crowd were calling, "Diana, Diana." So he felt surplus. and didn't really know what to do with himself, and made lots of sort of rather pathetic remarks like there should be two of me, and if I cut myself in half. I mean, he didn't know what to do or say, and yes, it was a form of jealousy, yes, it was.
The rest of the royal family and the royal household, they treated Diana as if she was just another gal. In fact, they didn't give her much consideration at all. I did notice that one day, going through the drawing room, the old Queen Mother, she passed the magazine table and Diana's face was on the front of Hello Magazine or something. And as she walked past the table, she flipped the magazine over onto its backside and carried on walking. That to me said, she's not really accepted. They don't like it. She's beginning to outshine even the senior members of the royal family. This is dangerous territory.
When I started my public life 12 years ago, I understood the media might be interested in what I did. I realized then their attention would inevitably focus on both our private and public lives. But I was not aware of how overwhelming that attention would become, nor the extent to which it would affect both my public duties and my personal life in a manner that's been hard to bear.
Well, the Andrew Morton book was a sensation. No one had any idea that Diana was involved with the book at all. And in fact, she even denied that she was at the beginning. But what happened was she made a decision that she wanted the world, if you like, to know the truth of her marriage. She was just felt it was going to be really cathartic. I don't know if she ever regretted it. I think she probably did because it caused so much trouble. But so she decided that Andrew Morton was a nice sort of intermediary to put these words out. And he was a friend of her friend, Dr. James Colhurst. They played squash together. So she thought, oh, I will tell James, and then James can take the tapes to Morton, and that way we'll never meet. And of course, this was planned sometime before the book came out. So the book came out in the summer of '92, but this all took place really at the end of '91, the beginning of '92. So, and when it was serialized in the Sunday Times before the book came out, I think it was, I know that Prince Charles had the newspaper faxed to him. This is the days of faxes. As soon as it dropped at midnight, the fax was sent through to Highgrove. And I think Diana says that the next morning, I think, at breakfast, I mean, he acted like nothing had happened at all. So it was that bad. It was just a freezing atmosphere.
Did you try to be faithful and honourable to your wife when you took on the vow of marriage?
Yes, absolutely.
And you were?
Yes. Until it became irretrievably broken down. Us both having tried.
The rift in their marriage had already been exposed with the publication of a book that went straight to the top of the bestseller list this summer. Diana, her true story, claimed to tell from the inside the tale of a loveless marriage, with evidence from some of her closest friends like her former flatmate, Caroline Bartholomew. Its author was Andrew Morton.
You must remember that the princess lived within the British royal family for 15 years. She knew exactly what went on within it. She knew how things were done. She was at times extraordinarily unhappy, and her husband did nothing. She felt very wretched much of the time, but at the same time she was a mother and she had to maintain a brave face for her children. She didn't want them too affected by her evident distress at finding herself in a loveless marriage with a husband who was carrying on an affair and not even bothering to hide it from her with Mrs. Camilla Parker Bowles.
Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
Simon Burton, what did you think of John Major? Well, actually.
Yeah. He's my best friend. Yeah.
Do you think Di was worth it?
Yeah.
Well, is Di worth 17 million?
You can still comment, can't you?
I mean, would you pay your wife 17 million if you got divorced?
Oh, well, probably, if I had it, I would, yeah.
On the day of their divorce, they sat down on the sofa together and cried, but I think that might have been Diana's fantasy, because I couldn't work out that they would have even been together at that moment. But at some stage, they obviously felt very sad about it, and they talked to each other, and Charles was much friendlier with Diana. Now he knew that the nightmare that she'd actually become unshackled from him, that he was able to form a much more reasonable relationship with her.